election was stolen. Well, it's fun to be out of the gulag. First off, I'd like to thank Ed Martin. I'd like to thank... Not that much. And I'd like to thank everybody who's here tonight. It's a very important cause. And there's a very... Knock it off, Matt. It's an important cause, and frankly, there's no shortage of things to discuss. I could quote the Founding Fathers and say these are the times that try men's souls, but the truth is that it's never been this bad in the United States. It's never been this bad. I could talk about the oppression of the labor movement or the civil rights movement, and those things were terrible, but the fact is the sheer scale and the blatant nature of the political persecution, it's never been seen before in this country. I'd like to thank Representative Louis Gohmert for being here, and I'll get into that in a minute. I don't know if he recognizes me, but there were two people who actually gave enough of a damn to come see American citizens rotting away inside the D.C. jail. It was Representative Louis Gohmert, and it was Marjorie Taylor Greene. They were turned away initially. They were turned away on the same day my own lawyer was turned away to see me. But they didn't stop. They kept trying, and they finally made their way in. And it was important for our representatives to come inside the D.C. jail and to see our conditions. This is the armband I had to wear 24/7 for 2 years. In solitary confinement and out of it. One thing you might notice is that it's caked with black mold because we were living in a condemned building. Our vents were filled with black mold. Our cells were filled with black mold, and so, frankly, were our lungs. We received no nutrition. We didn't get to have sunlight. We received no medical care. But more importantly than that, more important than the flesh is the soul. We couldn't see our families. We didn't get religious services. And even if the spiritual isn't your thing, legally speaking, as pretrial detainees, half the time, as I said, we couldn't even see our own lawyers. We didn't get access to our evidence. And as you saw, some of the guys in there, some of their families are here today, and they're getting closer and closer with each day as they rot to their freedom. But those men rotted in that jail. They were denied due process. I myself, as most of us, we were portrayed as right-wing extremists. We were portrayed as terrorists. I served my country for 12 years. I was in the United States Army Reserve. I was a U.S. Navy weapons contractor. But as with many men, and even women, after January 6th, the federal government hunted us down. They took any little thing they could out of our personal lives, whether it's literally memes off of my phone, to portray us as extremists. I was going out to the pet store the night I was pulled over by dozens of armored vehicles and SWAT teams pointing rifles in my face. I was dragged to the ground. I had skin torn off my shins because of how hard I was dragged to the ground, despite the fact that I never resisted arrest. You had people who have taken their lives. You have people who have been rotting behind bars in the absolute worst conditions. And we could have a whole other conversation about legal reform, about prison reform, and we should. But the important thing to remember is this. Donald Trump supporters, in particular, have been hunted down like animals. And for the longest time, nobody cared, with a few exceptions. And it's important to understand that it's not going to get better unless we both talk about this and we act on it. I fear, without getting too political, I think this might be the last year that we have to actually ensure that due process is still ingrained in our system. We have a very delicate system. It only works if those we put in power actually respect it. When I was rotting behind bars with those men, we barely had access to our families. And so one of the things we did when we weren't in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day is we bonded together. It was pretty much all we had. Patriot Freedom Project came along and pretty much did the same thing on the outside by uniting the families together so that they would have some level of support. And it wasn't institutional support. It never really is when it matters. But it was support where it mattered. It was support for the families, from the families. I ask all of you if you value the things that make America America, and you want to make America great again, if you want America to have any semblance of a chance, if you want America to survive, then you need to make sure it's not just the borders, though those matter. It's not just our culture, though that matters. It is also the principles that bound this empire together for centuries. The belief in civil liberties, the Bill of Rights, and even the 14th Amendment and those that came after. If we don't value our own rights as citizens, we're done for. We're going to collapse into an absolute despotism. It is highly important. I would say it's non-negotiable. If we're going to continue to be called America, then we need to defend freedom of religion, and we need to defend freedom of speech, and we need to defend due process, and we need to defend all those things this tyrannical regime has tried to strip from red-blooded Americans, people who've dedicated their lives to the common good. This regime will not stop. They've arrested over 1,400 American citizens, and they brag they're going to get 1,000 more before this election. This needs to stop. It can't just be said. People need to actually get behind that sentiment, and they need to voice that sentiment. Because what's happened is that by being scared, by being afraid to speak out, we have actually aided in the oppression of our fellow citizens. We have aided in the oppression of our countrymen by keeping our mouths shut, by playing it safe, and by not caring enough to speak up for those who are being oppressed. The pendulum always swings back in the other direction. The time will come when our oppressors become oppressed. That's not a good thing either. Justice delayed is justice denied. And an injustice to one is an injustice to all. And so I hope that as Americans, we realize this isn't just a time for speeches. This isn't just a time for fun. It's a time for reflection. And it's a time to remember those who have fallen on a sword as others have been burning on the pyre. So I want you to remember that there is a cause here. There is a mission here. It's not all fun and games. People's lives have been destroyed. Military careers, civil careers. People have lost their livelihoods, their homes, their businesses, and in many cases, their marriages and their families. It's not a joke. It's not a headline on CNN. This was a setup, and it's going to happen again if we don't stop it. So, with that,